and I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Katie Hanna, who I'm really excited to have with us. She is also a MASP board member, and she's going to be doing a presentation for us talking about changing narratives, how museums can adapt language to promote reconciliation. And so I will just let you take it from here, Katie. Thank you.
Sure. Awesome. Thank you. So hello, everyone. It's really exciting to see so many people here. I think I'm just going to dive right into things. I'm going to leave time at the end for questions. And I also have come up with like a Word document that has links to some of the resources I mentioned, as well as a copy of a document that I'm going to share with you if you want. So I'll have my email address posted on the first and last slide of my slideshow. So feel free to email me if you want that, or if you have questions, or if you want to say, hey, yeah, so just, I'll kind of make reference to that document throughout my presentation. And yeah, if you want a copy of it, I'll make sure that gets out to you. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Sure. Okay. All right. So as Em said, I am a curatorial assistant at the Western Development Museum's corporate office in Saskatoon. Just a little bit about me. I've been with the Western Development Museum for about 2.5 years now, since 2018. I have my bachelor's degree in history and archaeology from McGill and my master's degree in public history from Western University. So this has always been kind of my career path. So yeah, I'm really excited to be able to share a bit about what I've been doing with the Western Development Museum, and hopefully other museums can get some ideas and take something away from this. Like I said before, totally happy to answer questions. My email address is there and it'll be posted again at the end of the presentation. But if you somehow miss it, I'm sure Em can hook you up with my email address or other contact information if you need it. So with that, a little bit about the history of the Western Development Museum. The WDM has been around since the 1940s. And so this is a great long history, but it also means that we have some signs that date back probably from the 40s, 50s. And the thing about history is that it's not set in stone. Our understandings of it change over time. So that's one of the reasons I've started doing my project, which is to read, evaluate, and then, if necessary, rewrite every single sign in every single Western Development Museum. And so this is obviously time-consuming and labor-intensive, and it's never ending because history and language is constantly evolving. So as soon as I'm done this, or shortly after, will probably be time to go back and start all over again. But it's really important to make sure that we're presenting accurate, up-to-date information and that we're doing it respectfully. So yeah, this is a picture of the Western Development Museum, Saskatoon from 1957. Looks a bit different from how it looks now. It's a different location. But so we started this project in 2019 in response in part to the TRC calls to action and in part to the inclusivity report released in 2018, I believe. So we recognize that the Western Development Museum has historically been a museum with a strong focus on settler history, and this is reflected in both our galleries and our collection. We don't want to ignore or erase settler history, but we want to expand to acknowledge that white settlers are only one group in Saskatchewan's history, and that there are many, many other groups that need to be recognized who have important histories to share. Here are two of the TRC calls to action relating to museums that have kind of guided our work on this project up to this point. So the language remediation project is only one thing we're doing to diversify our museum, and I'll get into some of our other efforts near the end of this presentation with some really exciting artifact acquisitions we have and some partnerships. Okay, so the Western Development Museum is made up of 4 museum locations and a corporate office. We have locations in Moose Jaw, North Battleford, Saskatoon, and Yorkton, and the corporate office is also in Saskatoon. So this project, as I said, many of our signs haven't been updated in decades, and understandings of history change over time, and we really need to keep track of that. Language also changes over time. What was acceptable terminology in the 1950s or 60s is often no longer acceptable today. Obvious examples of this are how we refer to Indigenous people in our signs, but there's also things we've come across. Many of our older signs don't refer to women by name. If you have a woman, she'll be wife of Mr. John Smith, or she'll be Mrs. John Smith. And we want to work on that so we're not losing that woman's name. If we have it, we want to update it to include that information. And that's just 2 examples. There are so many examples of language use and ways of referring to people. The signs in our galleries have also been done piecemeal over time, which makes sense when you have an 80-year history. So this is a chance to take a comprehensive look at everything, make sure we're using consistent language, consistent tone, and have a consistent aesthetic in our signs as well, because tastes change and technology changes, and we want to kind of update as much as we can. So in preparation for this project, I developed a rubric with 11 different categories to examine. So this is what it looked like. We evaluate, through my evaluations, I found almost 50% of signs in our galleries are in need of change across the 4 locations. Some need a bit more, some need a bit less, but on average, it's about 50%. So with this rubric, the lowest score a sign can get is 2, which is excellent. It needs no changes. It's fine as it is. The highest score possible is 55, but no sign got close to that because not all of these categories are applicable to every single sign. So we, in total, I evaluated about 1,000 signs across the 4 locations, and I found that 456 of them were in need of change. And of that 456, 87 required urgent change. So I considered urgent change to be something with a score higher than 10. So I looked at 11 different criteria, and a sign could rank from 0, which was not applicable, or 1, which was excellent, to 5, which is really bad. All signs have a score on the first 2 criteria, which are how urgent are the changes and the overall acceptability of the language used. So that's why the lowest score a sign could have is 2, because if it got a 1 on both of those, it's a 2, and then we're fine. And then I just evaluated on the other 9 criteria as they were relevant or not. So some of the things I looked at were the presence of Indigenous perspectives, presence of other non-European perspectives, presence of non-Anglo-European perspectives, the manner in which the story is being told. So that was looking at the narrative, the tone, the point it's trying to make, the appropriateness of the language with regard to people with disabilities, appropriateness of associated artifacts and how they're displayed. So this is to make sure artifacts are being displayed respectfully, or maybe there was something displayed that maybe shouldn't be displayed, just keeping track of how things are being displayed. And then also whether Indigenous peoples and other minority groups are portrayed as individuals, so that we're acknowledging that there is a diversity of opinions within any group. And also that it acknowledges the diversity of Indigenous groups, so it's not taking a pan-Indigenous tone. And then if individuals are named where appropriate. So again, this comes back to, for example, if a woman is just referred to as Mrs. Husband's name, or also we have, some quotes that are just attributed to a treaty elder. We really want to track down an actual name of who that was, if at all possible. So I also had on here, you can see on the right-hand side, a section to mark if we need outside consultation. So if I feel like we need other external opinions to really address the issues with the sign, and then I could quickly off the top of my head record a few groups that I thought would be good to refer to. I also looked at accessibility. So for example, if we had a video with no subtitles, or sometimes we just have audio and there's no transcript of that. Sometimes we had signs that were in really small print, but you had to stand like 6 or 7 feet away because of barriers. Things like that, just trying to make it as accessible to as wide a range of audience as possible. This rubric is going to be in the resource document I referenced. So if you get it from me and you want to use it or modify it for your museum, please feel free. I'm happy to share, like, do whatever you want with it. I have identified a few flaws in this that if I were going back, or when I go back and do it again, I would definitely change. So first of all, there's no gender category on this rubric. Many signs I came across were either unnecessarily gendered, were biased against women, or assumed a gender binary. And all three of those things are things I really wish I could have included in my total score for a sign. So instead, I noted these in the additional notes section at the bottom of the page. And then I made a master list. So I recorded the stats from all my signs, where they were, what they were, and our progress on evaluating them. I also had a section for other issues present. So that was if the sign had issues in it that I couldn't record in the numerical score. So that was a way to kind of flag, like, this has a really good score, but there is something in here that needs to be changed. The other problem I've noticed with this rubric, and I've been thinking a lot about how I would fix it, is it's really good at identifying problematic language. It's less helpful in identifying issues with tone, because there is one spot for tone, how the story is being told, but there's many, many, many spots for language. And so language is kind of more heavily weighted in this rubric. So I do have some signs that are just absolutely awful that have a better score than some signs that are pretty bad. But because the signs that are pretty bad use really bad language, they scored much worse than the signs that I'm like, there's no fixing this. So those are things that I'm keeping in mind for the future. And I would encourage, if anyone does a project like this, to kind of keep those things in mind. So now we're going to go into a few examples of specific signs I found, the issues with them, and how I would go about fixing them. So the first example I want to do is winning the Prairie Gamble. This is a broad example. So for the Saskatchewan Centennial in 2005, exhibits were developed at all 4 WDM locations called Winning the Prairie Gamble. So there were exhibits done in all locations. The one done in Saskatoon is the biggest, and that's where a lot of my examples are going to come from. So we just have to remember that, this was done in 2005. The research was done a few years before that, as was the writing. So these signs are all easily 20 plus years old. The research is 20 plus years old. And even if it was solid work at the time, like I said, history changes, language changes. And we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report come out recently that also has really changed how we want to think about and address these topics. So this is just kind of an overview of the Winning the Prairie Gamble exhibit. This is a picture from Saskatoon. So examples of specific signs and the changes we're making. We have this one, the top got cut off, but it says no vote, no voice. And it is about women getting the right to vote in Saskatchewan. Now, on the right-hand side, I do have a list of voting rights in Canada and a timeline. So I want to just acknowledge that the sign is talking about Saskatchewan and my timeline is talking about Canada, but there's a lot of similarities between the timelines for voting rights. So the right to vote for women, the sign just says women got the right to vote in Saskatchewan in 1916. And that's really universalizing one experience, because as my timeline says, in 1949, was when Chinese, Japanese, and South Asian Canadians gained the right to vote. It was 1950 before Inuit had the right to vote, but there was little to no access to polling stations in the far north until the 1960s. Doukhobors got the right to vote in 1955. Prior to 1960, anyone who was a status Indian had to relinquish their status to vote. In 1993 was when people with intellectual disabilities got the right to vote, and incarcerated people got the right to vote in 2002. So women are included in all of those groups, so we can't just make a blanket statement saying all women could vote in 1916. So it's important. I'm not saying it's not important, an important milestone in 1916. It's just we need to qualify it and acknowledge that it was a subset of women who got the vote and not women across the board. Then my next sign, so this is one sign that I've worked on a lot to really acknowledge the diversity of voting experiences in Canada. The next sign, I'm going to read this out because it's long and I'm going to go into a lot of detail about it. So it's titled Opening the West, which right there is a little bit of a problem. And then we have between Canada's purchase of the vast Rupert's land from the Hudson's Bay Company in 1869 and the creation of the province of Saskatchewan in 1905, the federal government did many things to prepare the way for settlement. Surveyors were sent to impose a grid pattern of survey lines in what was then called the Northwest Territories. Treaties were signed with First Nations between 1871 and 1906, requiring a migratory Indian population to settle on reserves. The Northwest Mounted Police Force was established in 1873-74 to assure peaceful settlement in the region. After the 1885 resistance at Batoche, the federal government offered the Métis scrip certificates. All sorts of fraud and abuses occurred under the scrip system, ultimately leading to the loss of Métis land base in Saskatchewan. The construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway during the 1880s provided the essential transportation link between Eastern markets and Western resources. Free land for homesteading and a strong immigration policy brought people from Europe and elsewhere to open up Western lands for farming. And then I don't go into as much detail about the last paragraph, so I'll leave that there, but I'm not going to read that. So a few of the issues I noticed, one thing I didn't write down is the Northwest Mounted Police Force. They talk about peaceful settlement. I think that's a little bit of a one-sided perspective. I think if you were to ask Indigenous people of the time if the Northwest Mounted Police were peaceful, there may be a bit of a different perspective compared to the settlers. So that's something to keep in mind. We use the passive voice in this sign when we talk about signing treaties. And as anyone who has ever taken a university level history course knows, you try not to use passive voice. It removes the actor from the situation and it just says this thing happened and it doesn't say who did this thing. So who signed the treaties with the First Nations? We don't say that. We're removing the crown from the situation essentially. There's also no Indigenous perspectives anywhere in here. So even with the treaties being signed, why did they sign them? What were the options? What were the consequences of signing versus not signing? Those are all things I really think we should get into. The section on Métis scrip, this doesn't explain what scrip was at all. There is a sign quite a ways later in the exhibit that does explain the scrip system, but it's very far removed from this sign and it comes after, so you don't have the context for this. If I hadn't known what scrip was before this, I'd be like, okay, what's that mean? So, and then the second issue with that is it just says fraud and abuses occurred. It doesn't say who committed the fraud. And so if I was reading this the first time, I was like, are they saying the Métis were the ones who committed the fraud? Because it wasn't. It was white settlers who were trying to take advantage of the Métis and the scrip system. The Canadian Pacific Railway is only portrayed as positive, and I know there's a lot of negative feelings about that for many groups. And it also doesn't talk about who built the railway. It's kind of a top-down way of looking at history. My big thing is we need to talk about the Chinese laborers who worked on the railway, even if that was mostly in BC. It was a huge part of the history of Canada and of the CPR. And just the regular people who constructed it, whether they were Chinese or European, you know, just it's important to kind of provide the context of the average person, not just the government officials and the wealthy landowners or whatever. And then there's really loaded language in this, like free land and open up. So opening up the West kind of implies that it was closed off, and it was closed off often to European settlers, but it ignores, you know, the many thousands of years of history of people living in this land prior to European settlers arriving. So those are just a few of the issues with this sign. There are more. Those are just the ones that kind of really screamed out to me. The next example I have is this one. I've put the text because the photo is very blurry. I had to zoom in on a previously existing photo. But it says, in 1909, the most powerful earthquake in Saskatchewan's history rocked the southern part of the province on May 15th. The epicenter was west of Estevan, near the border between Montana and North Dakota. The quake was strong enough to crack plaster and move furniture. People as far away as Meadow Lake and L'Orange felt the tremors. So my big issue with this sign is just, we don't know that this was the most powerful earthquake in the area now known as Saskatchewan. So I would rephrase this just to be extra specific in the history of the province of Saskatchewan. And then we're saying from 1905 onward. Originally, I thought about saying in Saskatchewan's recorded history, but the more I thought about that, I realized I don't know the oral histories. That's a completely valid way of recording history. And there could very well be stories of more powerful earthquakes that I'm unaware of. So I think specifying in the history of the province of Saskatchewan gives us a very clear timeline of when we're talking about. So that's just another thing to be aware of. And then, yeah, so those are a few examples of like words and phrasing and tone. The other thing that I've really been working on is progress narratives. So a progress narrative is a way of framing history that portrays progress as linear and inevitable. The past is considered inherently less progressive and less advanced than the present, and the future is assumed to be more progressive and advanced than the past. So basically what this means is that it sees progress as a line like this, right? We're always going up and getting better, and we're never going down and getting worse. So there's a few issues with this. There's often value judgments in this. The way they did everything before was bad, and the way we do everything now is good. It also, progress is subjective. So what one group of people thinks is good or progressive, another group may not think. A really clear example of this would be the colonization of the Americas. From a European perspective, it's generally seen, and if you open like any history book, it's like, yay, we did it. We found this land and took it and everything's great. We're getting all this money from these resources. If you were to look at it from an Indigenous perspective, I think it would look very different, and that would not be considered progressive. It may even be considered regressive. So that's just one example of a progress narrative and the problems within it. It also assumes that change is inevitable, and and this erases all the hard work people do and put into like advancing human rights and things. So people fight hard for change. And the other part of that is that often when people start fighting for rights, there's a backlash movement. So it's not linear, even if they are moving up. It'll often go up and then go down and then back up. So you can't just say it goes from point A to point B. It's quite a zigzag. And it also implies that absolutely everything gets better and nothing gets worse. And again, you have to look at it from one perspective if you have a progress narrative. Different people will have different opinions about what's better, what's worse, what's progress, what's not. Another issue I'm addressing in my signs is the so what question. So a basic rule of writing signs is that all exhibit signage should answer the question, so what? Visitors want to be told why they should care. So like I can tell you, This is a cannon used by the Vancouver Yacht Club in 1910, but that doesn't really mean much. Why should it be preserved? Why are we spending money to preserve it? Why does this specific canon matter? Why should it matter to you? And how does this impact our understanding of history? So you really want to make people relate to the signs you're writing, not just like regurgitate historical fact after historical fact after historical fact. You want to tie it into something that visitors are interested in or something they can relate to, something that's relevant today, and it makes a difference. I have no idea what I'm going to do with this sign. I haven't actually looked at the history of the artifact to figure out why a Saskatchewan museum has a cannon from a Vancouver Yacht Club. But that's just my go-to example for a sign that really clearly is kind of missing the so what. So we have other efforts going on too. That kind of concludes the language remediation part of this presentation. So we're not just looking at words, but we're looking at narratives. So it's great to go through and change specific words here and there, but you have to look at the story as a whole. So we're working on decentering. Right now, as I mentioned at the beginning, the WDM is really heavily centered around settler stories. We want to decenter these stories, not get rid of them, but decenter them because we now recognize that there are many other groups that have contributed and continue to contribute to Saskatchewan. We want to bring other voices and stories to the forefront and create a fair representation of Saskatchewan today and in the past. So like I said, the use of certain individual words is bad, but we need to look at the story as a whole. How is it told? What does it imply? Who does it leave out? And what does it leave out? So we need to look at whose voices are absent. Often they're absent completely from the historical record, and you have to find a way to bring those voices in. So some of the things we've been doing that are really exciting, we've made some partnerships. So we're working with Whitecap Dakota First Nation on a photograph and naming project. So Whitecap Dakota First Nation was heavily involved in Pioneera from 1955 to the mid-1970s. In case anyone doesn't know, Pioneera is an annual event held at the WDM Saskatoon, and it's a few days of lots of agricultural demonstrations, cultural demonstrations, things like that. Starting in 2018, we partnered with elders from Whitecap Dakota First Nation to go through our photograph collection from this time period and name the individuals in the photos. And one thing we learned through this is that at Whitecap, Pioneera is remembered fondly as an Indigenous-centered activity, central to the community's summer calendar. However, Pioneera has generally been remembered as a settler-centric event, both by the museum and by past attendees. So this is a really interesting way of kind of changing the way we look at the past of Pioneera. So we're planning a display of photographs relating to Whitecap and Pioneera in the WDM to share both the history of the event and its partnership with Whitecap Dakota First Nation, and also to facilitate sharing of Dakota culture under the guidance of Whitecap Dakota First Nation's elders. We also host Métis Cultural Days, organized by the Central Urban Métis Federation, Inc. And that's been an annual event for a few years now. And then we're working on repatriation with the Saskatchewan Indigenous Cultural Center when we come across that need. So these are all, and we're hoping to build more partnerships over the years. We have lots of ideas and a few things in the works, and it's all very exciting. The other thing we're doing is changing our collection efforts. We just recently released a new collections development plan. If you get the resource sheet from me, it has a link to that PDF online. And you can kind of see how we're evaluating what we're being offered and how we're making decisions on what we want to accept and what we want to look for. So the first collection we have is the Chan collection. I absolutely love this one. So Betty Chan was from a Chinese family in Saskatoon, and she started taking dance classes in the 50s. I believe it was ballet, but she would show up early, and the class before her was a Highland dance class. So she started watching and then imitating the dance moves, and the teacher realized she was really good. So she started taking Highland dance classes, and she became a very well-known Highland dancer in Canada. She even danced for Queen Elizabeth II for the centennial in 1967. So we have some of her artifacts. We believe this was a judging skirt, not a dancing skirt, just based on the information we got from the Highland Dance Association of Saskatchewan. I don't know what they're called. And we have a vest, and then we have swords. But what's really interesting is the plaid on the skirt was made for Betty Chan. When the Frum brothers of Galt, Ontario heard about Betty Chan and her dancing, they designed the Chan plaid, or the Mick Chan plaid, as they called it, and they sent her a bolt of fabric, and she had a few things made with it. And there's symbolism to all the colors in it. It's really cool to see, and it's really exciting story to have. The next collection we have is the Chakravarti Collection. So we have quite a few items from this family. They were one of the first Indian families in Saskatoon. They came in the 1960s when the father of the family, Dr. Aninda Chakravarti, was hired as professor of geography at the University of Saskatchewan. At the time, there were very few Indian items or anything to be found in Saskatoon, including spices, clothing, and musical instruments. So people would often purchase items in India and have them shipped to Canada. The closest store that carried some of the spices to be used was in Edmonton. So we have a few of the items from the collection. We have formal ensembles. There's the women's on the left and the men's on the right, which was bought by Dr. Chakravarti's daughter, Dr. Anita Chakravarti, and her husband, Dr. Paramlali, on a return trip to India in the 1990s. And they chose subdued color scheme for the ensembles to better blend in with the formal wear most people in Saskatoon would wear. And the sitar was purchased also for Anita Chakravarti in 1972 or 73, when the family spent his sabbatical year in India. She took lessons in India and then continued to study the instrument once she returned to Saskatoon. A really cool thing about this is we have the case it comes in, and the case still has the luggage tags on it from when they came back to Saskatoon from India, which is just really exciting. A third collection we have is the Tam Collection. So these are all from Tom Yee, who's also known as Kok Him Tam. He opened the Lorne Avenue Chop Suey restaurant in Saskatoon, which is was at the corner of Lorne and Taylor. It was sold to new owner. He ran it for over 20 years, and it was sold to new owners in the late 80s, early 90s. And then unfortunately, the building burned down in 1995. So Tom Yee, so the menu we have is from Lorne Avenue Chop Suey. Tom Yee was a pillar in the Chinese community in Saskatoon during his time. He was president of the Chinese Folk Art Society, and he taught lion dance to children in Saskatoon. So that's where we have the lion dance mask, which is the photo in the middle. And then on the right, we have a teaser mask. So the teaser would be the guide for the lion. They would tease the lion into moving and doing certain movements. So we have a full teaser costume, and we have the lion mask, which is gorgeous. So one thing we learned from this collection is that the Chinese cultural events in Saskatoon were basically all held in Riversdale, which is considered to be the historic Chinatown of Saskatoon. But this restaurant was in the exhibition area, away from the concentration of Chinese restaurants, likely a strategic move to have less competition for customers. And then the final collection I really want to talk about is our Saskatchewan LGBTQ2+ history collection. So this was launched in November 2018, and I have more information about this also on my resource sheet. So this is a permanent collection dedicated to preserving the history of LGBTQ2+ individuals and groups in Saskatchewan. It's new but fast growing. So some of the items we have include jewelry and a crown. So this is the jewelry in the middle, custom made for well-known Saskatchewan drag queen Crystal Clear, who was Empress 14 of Regina and all of Saskatchewan. And they were first worn in 2005. I think there's a bit more information about Crystal Clear and the jewelry on our website. On the left, we have a patch from PFLAG Saskatoon. So PFLAG stands for Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And it's basically a support organization. And so this patch would have been worn, as you can see, it has the safety pins in it, would have been worn to identify PFLAG members at events like Pride or rallies, lots of things. And on the right, we have a pin from Saskatoon's Pride Week in 1998. Saskatoon Pride was first celebrated annually in 1992. There had been celebrations previously to that, but not annually. They were just kind of when they happen. So with that, that is a brief summary, or a not so brief summary, of our language remediation project and other things we're doing at the WDM. If you have questions, you can ask now. My email address is there. I am very happy to get emails. I don't get a lot of them, so it's kind of exciting when I do. You don't have to feel bad, like, oh, she probably has like a million emails. I don't. So please, yeah, if you have any questions, if you want that resource sheet, if you want, I don't know, if you want to chat, whatever. Yeah, I'm happy to talk. And if you think you have anything relating to a community or a group that you think may be valuable for the WDM to have, we have a collection freeze right now because of COVID. But I can put you in touch with our registrar, who I think is keeping a list of people to contact when we start collecting things again. And she can like screen things for you and all that fun stuff. And you can look through our collections development plan. We have an FAQ on our website, which I believe is also on my resource sheet for kind of like what we're looking for and the collections process for the museum. So thank you so much for listening to me. I'm going, actually, I will leave this up for a little bit in case you want to copy down my email address. But I think I see we had some things going on in the chat and a hand raise. So
well, one thing I was going to say, Katie, I'm happy if you want to send the resource document to me. I'm happy to post it like with the link to the previous chat. That's fine.
Fabulous. Yes, that's perfect.
Yep. And yeah, we do have a question from Cal. If you're welcome to unmute yourself there, Cal, if you want to ask.
Okay, yeah, just when you're talking about, I understand your difficulty in doing these matrices to come up with these numerical scores. It's something I used to do a lot in my day job, which has absolutely nothing to do with museums, but we had to evaluate conditions of infrastructure and stuff like that. I'm just wondering, did you consider just initially doing sort of like a walkthrough and sort of, and having more than one person do it, but just go through and look at a sign and either sort of do a pass fail on the sign, just to sort of make the size of the problem. And if you get 5 people walking through and 5 people fail a sign, obviously something's got to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And if all 5 pass it or 4 pass it, well, we can worry about that one later. I'm just thinking, because I mean, I understand what a huge task that would be going through. And something we always looked at was, could we somehow focus on the real problem without evaluating things that weren't an issue yet?
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea. I think one of the problems is because we're spread out, we'd have to send 5 people to all 4 cities. And just in terms of time, even just walking through and reading a sign, when there's 1,000 of them, the time does add up. I think like if resources were infinite, that would be a really great way to do it. And also I think the good thing about going through with my rubric instead of just like a quick look is it's more of a fine-tooth comb. So there are some signs that like on first glance, I read them. I was like, oh, that's fine. And then when I actually went through and looked at all the things I'm evaluating, I started to think like, actually, there is something there that's not quite working. So yeah, no, I think though in the future, like if we have to redo this in 5 years, when we've done such a thorough evaluation the first time, it might be a way to go forward and do a pass fail first. Now that we've done the really intensive review. Yeah.
And I guess just the other thing, so when you look at upgrading signs and would you look at, say, upgrading all the signs within a given exhibit? Because I could see there could be a little bit of a, if you kind of come up and you start with the worst first, you get a real patchwork.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I did was the first thing I did, we haven't actually gotten around to finalizing or printing or posting any of the signs I've rewritten yet. COVID has surprisingly thrown a wrench in everything. But so the first thing I did was identified the really, really, really urgent ones. Those are the ones I did first. And afterwards, I think it was like 15 of the really urgent signs. And afterwards, we're going through section by section and just doing all the signs in that section so that it does maintain a consistent aesthetic. And so we don't have it come out really piecemeal and we have one new sign here and 10 ones from like 1973 over here.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Any other questions? Have some good stuff in the chat. Yeah. I don't even know what time we're at. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I'll get the resource sheet to, oh, no, that's not what I wanted to click. Stop share. There we go. Yeah. Like I said, if you think of anything after the fact that you want to ask or anything like that, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk about what I'm doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Katie, for sharing that. And that's, you know, it's really important work that I think, you know, it's great to be a kind of a leader in moving that forward. And I'm really excited that we were able to record this and you know, people will be able to share it with different folks and that sort of thing. So yeah, thanks for the presentation. I echo everyone's comments and saying it was fantastic. So.
Well, we just have a raised hand now.
Oh yeah, for sure. Eileen, go for it.
Sorry, I also have a hard time staying quiet on these things because they're so informative. Are you guys at Mass still doing, I remember at some of the fall gatherings or spring gatherings, you guys were doing kind of a little bit of a workshop or presentation on working with different groups and how to kind of engage and cooperate with groups. Are you guys still doing those sessions?
I think you're talking about the network knowledge exchange sessions that were developed in 2018-19. I think that was when we did them. And it was, one was around the implications of the TRC and UNDRIP for museums. And the other was around the exhibition, responsible exhibition and interpretation of Indigenous artifacts. We don't particularly have those presentations kind of ongoing, but we do have 2 written resources that are available as resources to our members, but they're on our website. But again, if somebody's interested in that, I'd be happy to send them along for sure.
Perfect. Yeah, I've got a connection of one of our member museums is looking at working with one of the First Nations communities and doing some stuff. And I really like, Katie, your verbiage on like changing the narrative and decentering stories and recognizing groups and the makeup of the regions. I think that's like a really powerful, I know we always kind of struggle with our reporting and documents, but I think that would be like a great ad lib into a grant or something to encourage the cooperation. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Oh yeah, and so there's a few links that have been posted in the chat. One for the LGBTQ2+ project at the WDM, one for reconciliation. So those are the WDM specific ones that have been posted so far.
I'll definitely include all those links with the YouTube video as well, for sure. And I can probably include links to our docs as well. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Fantastic. Well, not to rush anyone off for sure. If there's more questions, that is totally fine. Just see here for a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'll make sure everybody gets your resources. And yeah, just once again, thank you. And thanks to everyone for joining us this morning. We had a great group, lots of people. So good to see everybody, and have a great week.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.